If her people had gone farther west, into the higher mountains, her great-great-grandparents might have toiled in the streams and the mines. They might have staked their claim there, plucking out nuggets and digging out gold dust. But they would never have found anything richer than this. Jillian had understood the land's worth and its allure the first moment she'd seen it. She'd been 10. At her grandfather's invitation, command, Jillian corrected with a smirk. Both she and her brother, Mark, had made the trip west, to Utopia. Mark had been there before, of course. He'd been 16 and quietly capable in the way of their father, and no more interested in ranching than his father had been. Her first glimpse of the ranch hadn't surprised her, though it wasn't what many children might have expected after years of exposure to Western cinema. It was vast, and somehow tidy. Paddocks, stables, barns, and the sturdy charm of the ranch house itself. Even at 10, even after one look, Jillian had known she hadn't been meant for the streets and sidewalks of Chicago, but for this open sky and endless land. At 10, she'd had her first experience with love at first sight. But it wasn't love at first sight with her grandfather. He'd been a tough, weathered, opinionated old man. The ranch and his herd had been his life. He hadn't the least idea what to do with a spindly girl who happened to be his son's daughter. They'd circled each other warily for days, until he'd made the mistake of letting out some caustic remark about her father and his choice of pills and needles. Quick-tempered, Jillian had flown to her father's defense. They'd ended up shouting at each other, Jillian red-faced and dry-eyed even after being threatened with a razor strap. They'd parted at the end of that visit with a combination of mutual respect and dislike. Then, he'd sent her a custom-made, buff-colored Stetson for her birthday. And it began. Perhaps they'd grown to love one another so deeply because they'd taken their time about it. Those sporadic weeks during her adolescence, he'd taught her everything, hardly seeming to teach at all. How to gauge the weather by the smell of the air, the look of the sky. How to deliver a breech calf. How to ride fence and herd a steer. She'd called him Clay because they'd been friends. And when she'd tried her first and only plug of tobacco, he'd held her head when she'd been sick. He hadn't lectured. When his eyes had grown weak, Jillian had taken over the books. They'd never discussed it, just as they'd never discussed that her move there in the summer of her 20th year would be permanent. When his illness had begun to take over, she'd gradually assumed the responsibilities of the ranch, though no words had passed between them to make it official. When he died, the ranch was hers. Jillian hadn't needed to hear the will read to know it. Clay had known she would stay. She'd left the East behind, and if there were memories from there that still twisted inside her, she buried them, more easily than she'd buried her grandfather. It was herself she grieved for, and knowing it made her impatient. Clay had lived long and hard, doing as he chose, the way he chose. His illness had wasted him, and would have brought him pain and humiliation had it continued. He would have hated that. Would have railed at her if he could have seen how she'd wept over him.
God almighty, girl, what are you wasting time here for? Don't you know there's a ranch to run? Get some hands out to check the fence on the West 40 before we've got cattle roaming all over Montana.
Yes, she thought with a half-smile. He'd have said something like that, cursed her a bit, then would have turned away with a grunt. Of course, she'd have cursed right back at him. "You mangy old bear," she muttered. "I'm going to turn Utopia into the best ranch in Montana just to spite you." Laughing, she threw her face up to the sky. "See if I don't!" Sensing her change of mood, the mare began to dance impatiently, tossing her head. "All right, Delilah." Jillian leaned over to pat her creamy neck. "We've got all afternoon." In a deft move, she turned the mare around and started off at an easy lope. There weren't many free hours like this, so they were prized. As it was, Jillian knew she'd stolen them.